economy and their GDP is about a little over $28 billion. Ours is $21 billion. I'm sure there aren't any North Carolinians here, but if there are, no offense, but we're more beautiful than they are, and we should be number one on the East Coast, and I really believe that. And so I propose in that plan a lot of conservation and preservation. I want to get the Clinch River State Park done during the course of my governorship. I want to have 50 more inputs or put-ins, a lot of people say, for canoes and kayaks and boats on our lakes and rivers and streams. I think that's important to economic development and economic opportunity for us to continue to be have such natural beauty. It's an asset. Natural beauty is an economic asset for us. And so preserving that, protecting that, I don't find to be in competition with economic development. Now I know in terms of development and things like that, there are areas we've got to preserve. I'm as folks probably know, a conservative. And the same root word for conservationist. And we need to conserve, and we need to preserve, and we need to protect. And so I know there are times when there's a strain, and we have to get the balance right. But to my mind, if done right, these policies for conservation, preservation, outdoor recreation, which by the way would be thousands of jobs, are not in conflict. They are much in complement.
It often gets reduced down to that sort of the contest.
And let me just say this. I think a lot of that sometimes, there's natural tension. I'm not minimizing. There's always going to be some natural tension. But I also think that when you can bring stakeholders together, a lot of times there's a lot more common ground than people realize. And that if you're willing to put the time in, make it a priority, bring people together and say, look, let's find, and we've seen this in easements and conservation grants and things like that, where we've been able to get the development community and the business community and the conservationist community together to find common solutions. I think there's a lot more of that to be had.
Shifting on to a different topic, numerous studies have shown that the many benefits of outdoor learning, from higher test scores to lower levels of stress and obesity amongst children, collectively the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the James River Association provide outdoor educational experiences for over 15,000 students and teachers in Virginia each year. Virginia's governor has historically supported environmental education in some way or another, but budget woes last year led to the elimination of the Office of Environmental Education in the Department of Conservation and Recreation. As governor, would you support the restoration of educational functions performed by that office and its partners?
Yes. Yeah. Where on the flow chart and that kind of thing, I'm not exactly sure. I know the functions you're talking about, though. We need those functions, and I'm supportive of those functions. And they do serve an important purpose. It's one of the points I made in my outdoor recreation plan for the Outdoor Dominion, by the way, and I got the website, outdoordominion.com. I'm going to give that to the Commonwealth of Virginia after November 7, because we need to use that to promote outdoor recreation. And one of the points I make is it's not just the jobs and the tax revenue and the GDP impact that it has, the impact on public health, and for young people in particular, and to have a healthier Virginia is important. And so this education, I think, is an important function of our government. Maybe one other point, if I might, Quentin, and it's a little bit of a digression, but I think it's an important one. One of the reasons we face these funding strains is because of a lack of economic growth in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Economic stagnation. And so let me just pull the lens back a little bit and say one of the most important things we can do to help fund programs like that and have the resources and the revenue for them is to get our economic growth rate up from 0.6%, 39th out of 50 states in the country, to where we rightly belong, which is to be number one in economic growth. I truly believe that too, in economic growth and job creation, and that would help us meet some of the concerns relative to funding for important programs like this. But I don't think that should be lost in it, and I mention it everywhere. I know what our focus is here today, but when you pull back the lens a little bit, I do think that going from 0.6% to 3.5% economic growth and going from 39th in the country to first in the country in economic growth will help us meet a lot of these needs over time. So I just want to put a plug in for my economic plan too.
Fair enough, fair enough. Historical and projected sea level rise is presenting Hampton Roads communities, businesses, and military operations with unprecedented challenges, as you well know. And Tangier Island, where you were recently, is faced with an increasingly existential threat from sea level rise and erosion. As Governor, what specific policy solutions would you propose and support to ensure that our coastal communities, and I'm talking about both densely populated cities and rural coastal communities, are protected from the effects of sea level rise and recurrent flooding?
Let me talk about Tangier. First of all, they need erosion protection and they need a seawall on the other side of the island that has been pending for some time, and I would work hard to make sure we got the core money for that and got that built. We've got to preserve Tangier Island. And I was with Gillespie, who's kind of famous, if folks are familiar with him from 60 Minutes, and he feels strongly about this, I do too. But then in terms of sea level rise, I actually have a plan. If you go to my website, edforvirginia.com/sea level rise, I put forward a plan a couple weeks ago. Here's a hard copy of it, to deal with sea level rise and recurrent flooding. And it includes proposals for more affordable flood insurance. Now that addresses the effect, not the sea level rise itself. But look, Hampton Roads, Norfolk, we are second only to New Orleans in terms of the impact of sea level rise and land subsiding. And we have got to address it. And it is not just a threat to property value and homes. It is a concern for our BRAC readiness, for the Base Closure and Realignment Commission and that process, which I suspect we're going to see another one in the not too distant future. And if at Eustis Langley and Norfolk and Oceana and other places we have this recurrent flooding and we have sea level rise and our personnel are not able to get to the bases, we're going to be vulnerable. And so it is a BRAC readiness issue as well. And so sea level rise is a priority for me. I put forward this specific plan to address it, including infrastructure aspects of it. What William & Mary and VIMS and ODU are doing, I think is very, very important. We need to foster that and encourage that. The Netherlands has been dealing with this for some time. For them, they are exporting now the technology to deal with sea level rise, the intellectual property to deal with sea level rise, and they are a leader in Europe and Asia. I think that we in Virginia can be leaders in coming up with the solutions, the technologies, the practices that we can then also market, frankly, from the work that's being done at ODU and VIMS and William & Mary. But I've got a whole plan.
Can you talk just about one or two of the specifics of your plan, and also, are there opportunities for federal funding? You talked a lot about the military bases. Are there opportunities for federal funding through DoD funding, for example, that would help the region as well?
We're going to need federal funding. We're not going to be able to address this concern at the local level and or the state level. We're going to need to work. It's got to be a federal level, a state level, and working with the cities in Hampton Roads as well. And that is part of my plan, actually. And DoD does have an interest here. And we want to work with them in that regard. But there's other things, just in terms of, for example, any capital outlays that we make as a state in this area. We need to measure what is the effect that such capital outlays would have. Is it going to make the prospect of sea level rise worse or better? And that needs to be a factor before we make capital outlays as a state. We do need to help folks there in terms of flood insurance, and it's got to be something that we are looking at holistically across a number of departments and agencies, VDOT and VDEM and a lot of other of our departments and agencies. And so I would have in my cabinet someone tasked with the responsibility and the priority of addressing sea level rise and recurrent flooding. And by the way, the recurrent flooding problem is not limited to our east. It is a problem in our west, in our valleys, with our streams and our rivers, and we've got to address it there as well.
Okay. On to a different topic. There are two proposed pipelines in the Commonwealth right now: the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Interstate Pipeline. Detractors of the pipeline say that they present environmental risks, impact private landowners, create potential safety hazards, and perpetuate a dependency on fossil fuels. Supporters say the pipelines will bring jobs to Virginia, provide less expensive natural gas, and will reduce the nation's dependency on foreign energy and on higher emissions power sources. As you well know, the pipelines are very controversial. Do you support them? And if so, how do you mitigate the potential negatives of these two projects?
I do support them. I think concerns about private property and environmental impact are legitimate, and I think we can address those concerns. In fact, I think we must address those concerns, and in fact, it is law that we address those concerns, and we need to comply with the law. But I believe that we can build that infrastructure in a way that is environmentally sensitive and protective of private property rights. To your point, Quentin, the natural gas is plentiful, it's affordable. It's important to us in our economy to get our economic growth rate going again, to have reliable sources of affordable energy here. Natural gas, cleaner burning than coal, although coal's making some progress. We need to encourage coal to continue to make progress in being cleaner burning and cleaner in terms of its impact on the air. But natural gas is an affordable, plentiful resource for us, and it is cleaner burning. And I'm supportive of it because if we're going to foster greater job creation, advanced manufacturing, and the ability for us to have good paying jobs in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we need to have a stable, reliable source of affordable energy, and the Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast pipelines will help provide that for us.
Speaking of coal, Governor McAuliffe placed a moratorium on new permits related to coal ash disposal until 2018, until next year, and has asked Dominion Energy to present alternatives to storing the materials permanently in the ground near the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. How do you think coal ash disposal should be handled in the Commonwealth? What would be your plan and thoughts of
I support the moratorium. I'm not using this as a dodge. We do have, in the same way we've got the midpoint assessment coming, we do have our agencies, DEQ and others, looking at the coal ash question and to make recommendations on how best to address that. And it's something we've got to come together and we've got to figure out. And so I would want to get a little more information. Let this, while the moratorium is in place, let the agencies do their evaluation, do an appraisal of what is the best way to address the coal ash situation. And I'd want to hear from them before. I do not have an answer here today on that, because there's a lot of very smart people with a lot of different perspectives, evaluating what is the best approach here, and I'm very eager and open to hearing those recommendations as governor.
Okay, I think that's a fair enough answer. One other question, and I'll give you the opportunity to tell me if I've missed anything. Offshore drilling and offshore wind farms are potential eyesores, potential ecological dangers, and potential economic boons also for the Commonwealth. What is your primary consideration when deciding which, if either, to support or not support?
You said offshore wind farms and wind?
I said offshore drilling and offshore wind farms. I sort of combined them together.
Well, I am an all of the above person, in terms of having diversified energy sources in the Commonwealth of Virginia and also good paying jobs. The fact is, I am supportive of development of our deep sea coast and having that option for us in Virginia. The truth is, when you look at the economics of it and the fact that seismic tests and things like that are very out of date, we wouldn't be looking at that anytime soon. I would like to preserve that option for the Commonwealth of Virginia for offshore development of our oil and gas resources. But because of what we just talked about, the affordability and the shale revolution in natural gas, and the plentiful supply on land and the cost of the testing and the development off the deep sea coast, it's very, very unlikely that we would see it, even if we could. Now the turbines and the wind are a different situation. We made a lot of progress in terms of the cost efficiency of that. Transmission still somewhat of an issue in terms of cost efficiency, but I'm for diversifying our energy portfolio in Virginia, and I would like to see us be able to do more in terms of wind. But you know, we have the tourism industry now. I think they can be far enough offshore that we can address those concerns. But going back to the point about RAC and the Navy and the concerns about the Navy ships and their concerns, you know, we'd have to meet those concerns as well. And again, I'm for diversifying the energy portfolio in Virginia, but that's something where you'd also have to get the balance right. I suspect there are folks here from Hampton Roads and Norfolk and Virginia Beach, and you know, if the Navy says that this is a problem for our carriers, that's a problem for us, and we need to, you know, to work with them to mitigate those concerns.
So these are a set of questions that I and others thought were important to the environmental policy in Virginia. But what have we missed? You've thought a lot about this.
You know, I mean, if you look at my, I brought another plan here for folks to look at. You know, the outdoor dominion plan, also my agriculture and forestry plan, which ties in obviously to conservation and clean water and how we address that. And you'll see in terms of the best management practices relative to TMDL and things there, I've got a thoughtful approach to the cost sharing with our agriculture sector in that regard. I came out in my energy plan, which I unveiled a couple of weeks ago, probably worth mentioning here. I am opposed to uranium mining in the Commonwealth. I think it's a risk to our water supply, and that the benefit to us from economic development and growth and energy is not worth that risk. So I thought that might be something folks here might appreciate. And I guess I would say, Quentin, you know, if you look at all these policies, including the ones we've talked about here today, my agriculture and forestry policy, my energy policy relative to diversifying our portfolio, not mining uranium here because of the tailings and the risk of the water supply. You know, I've tried to take a very thoughtful approach and a balanced approach, and I pride myself in listening to people. I do believe that the Chesapeake Bay we are blessed with it. And we're blessed with natural beauty all across the Commonwealth. I would say I feel bad for candidates who have to run in states that aren't Virginia because of the natural beauty that we have everywhere. But the Chesapeake Bay is a treasure. I believe we have been entrusted with it, and that we have a responsibility to be good stewards of it, to keep it clean. It is very important for our economy. I mentioned outdoor recreation. Let me mention the watermen. And you know, I had reason a little over a year ago to be in New York City before I had started my campaign full time, and I was in a restaurant there, and I think it was for business, but on the menu, Virginia oysters. And you know, we have, you know, the oysters and the clams and the crabs and you know, our aquaculture sector and our watermen, you know, having clean tributaries and a clean Chesapeake is very important to them as well, as much as it is, you know, in many ways, to my mind, a moral, you know, obligation. It is smart economics. And we want, I mean, Virginia oysters are getting to be like California wine, you know, in terms of the brand. We want that brand, the Tangier oysters and the Lynnhaven oysters, and we want people to know when Cherrystone clams, you know, they want seafood from the Virginia Chesapeake. That's good for us. That's good for our economy. It's good for jobs. But, you know, I guess my point is, it's not just about the beauty and the responsibility to keep it clean, that if you're a conservationist, that you know is your obligation and the stewardship that we've been entrusted with. It also has a lot to do with jobs and the economy. And that was, to my earlier point, I don't see, you know, a necessary strain and tension that some people see. I see a complementary policy approach here that can work for all Virginians. So I guess I would just point those things out.
Great. Well, our time is up. I know you've got a busy campaign schedule, so I want to thank you very much for being here.